One of my favorite journalists is Leslie Kean. I've interviewed her a couple of times. The first one was for UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record. An outstanding book. I loved my interview. I don't have that one. I do have in the archives Surviving Death. A journalist investigates evidence for an afterlife. Another outstanding report. And this investigation, she says, changed her. My favorite part of it was what she discovered through working with a physical medium. Like I said, this interview was saved in the archives and it's been edited to remove the music. So this is an updated, refreshed interview with Leslie Kean.
These are skeptics. These are profoundly skeptical, very sophisticated people who went out and studied these mediums and observed these things and were forced to come to the conclusion that they're real. They couldn't explain it.
Leslie, this is a fantastic job that you've done, and you give people a whole lot more support for what they have experienced and maybe a few tips on what to look for if you've had an experience with somebody who's crossed over and whether it's legit if you're going to a medium or something like that to find out more. So thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Thanks for all those kind words. And yeah, I do think if most people have had experiences or they know someone that has, and yeah, this book could sort of help people put that in context and see what all this kind of factual evidence is that supports the experiences that they've had. So it's very comforting in that way, I think.
Who were the experts that you found the most credible for somebody else who's looking at this from a scientist's background?
Oh, well, I mean, there were so many, and there were actually some of them that actually wrote chapters in my book. So, of course, those are the ones that I feel most connected to. For instance, Dr. Jim Tucker, who wrote about the reincarnation cases, particularly I covered some of the cases in my book, but he wrote a chapter which focuses on young children that have these memories from all over the world. And so he's incredible. He's the successor to Ian Stevenson, who some people may have heard of, who studied these cases for decades and just died maybe 5-10 years ago. So he's one of them. And then there's Pim van Lommel, who I absolutely think is terrific, the cardiologist who has studied near-death experiences and consciousness and written lots of books about it. And Peter Fennick is another one. He's British. He studies end-of-life experiences. And these people are just, Wendy, they're so eloquent. They're so kind of distinguished. And, these elderly gentlemen who have been doing this forever. And it's just been such an honor for me to have them in the book, to be part of the book. Another person I really love is Julie Beischel. She's a Ph.D. who studies mediums. And she works out of an institute called the Winbridge Institute in Arizona. You've probably heard of her.
Yeah.
She's fantastic. I mean, there are these very highly educated people who have devoted themselves to studying various areas of this question of survival. And I've kind of tried to pull them all together and pull in the kind of most essential, what I think to be the most evidential and most essential information. So there's a lot of really great experts that I've been able to benefit from knowing and from also studying their work.
Well,
Erlander Haraldson is absolutely incredible. Have you heard of him?
No.
Erlander Haraldson, yeah. He's a psychologist from Iceland who is really one of the giants in this field. I encourage everybody to look him up. He's probably written, 20 books or something. He studies mediums. He has studied reincarnation cases, psychic phenomena, a whole range of stuff. And his books are very accessible. And, he's probably in his 80s now. He's late 80s even. So he's just had an amazing career, and I recommend him highly to people.
I was going to say that we do have a local connection with the Winbridge Institute, and that's Tracy Bray. She's a medium who is certified through that organization, and there's some rigid criteria that they go through to make sure that they get a certification. And you worked with a couple of mediums, and you had some incredible results. The other thing I wanted to mention, you also had people who had died recently, which that isn't always the case when you're doing the research, and I think that probably was a crucial element.
I know. I mean, it just all sort of came together. And not that you're ever happy to lose somebody. Absolutely not. It was an absolute shock for me when I lost my brother. He was younger than me, and I never expected that he would suddenly die. Mm-hmm. And so it was tragic. But it also happened during the time I was writing this book, and I was very kind of plugged into all of this. And as far as I understand it, there were some communications that came through from him. Now, I can't prove that. But I do write about that in the book, what happened to me and how I interpreted it and how I relate to it. And I'm sure other people have had similar experiences. So, yeah. And then I had lost a very close friend right before, and that was in 2011, who I was actually with when he died. So I had the experience of being with somebody when they took their last breath, which is also kind of a profound moment for anybody, and stimulated my mind, too, to ask a lot of questions and kind of try to deal with the almost surreal experience of witnessing that. It's just incomprehensible when that happens.
You're talking about Bud Hopkins?
Yeah, when Bud Hopkins died, I mean, he was in hospice, so it was a peaceful kind of flow and process in which we knew it was going to happen. So it was one of those deaths that was very peaceful, and you could just sit with the person. And then we were holding his hand. I was with his daughter, and, he's breathing, and then suddenly he stops breathing, and that's it. And it's just such a mind-blowing thing. I don't know. It's hard to explain it unless you've experienced it, but that also sort of helped stimulate me to want to go more in this direction with the research. So.
Prior to my grandfather's passing, the energy that had built up, I remember touching, just, making that connection and touching his hand, and I had a bruise on my hand from the energy that was building from him preparing to transition. And that was one of the things I thought was so striking in terms of nobody prepares you for some of these other little things that happen at the time. And of course, it's different with each unique transition. But I was like, oh my gosh, the body was actually building energy and storing. And I thought, wow. So, but you
actually had a bruise that you could see on your hand.
On my hand.
See?
Yeah,
wow.
on my hand.
That's incredible.
From like that energy, that spark. And I knew, and some of these things you experience, I've experienced with pets, and I've experienced a dog when he was transitioning, and we had to euthanize him, and then I had asked him, because this was really, really tough. It's tough losing anybody, and pets you have an emotional connection to, and I asked him, please let me know you'll be okay. And the moment he exited, I felt him just go right through me, right through my face, my head, just on through, and I thought, wow, because it was a physical action, and it happened.
Wow.
And these aren't things you can prove to people, but once you've had your own experiences, then there's nobody else who can tell you or explain about it, really. It's that thing of, okay, I know what happened. And
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so that part.
That's amazing, yeah. I mean, these experiences are life-changing, absolutely. The experience is sort of the foundation for all of us. But then, I have this, as a journalist and sort of with this probing mind, I have this desire to sort of say to the world, how can anybody out there say that these things aren't real? And so by doing research, you can show that there's a context for them, that they've been studied, and that you can document the fact, for instance, that extremely powerful psychic abilities exist. And, whether they have to do with survival after death, we can't prove that, but we can certainly prove that the phenomena exist that would suggest that. And so I love taking the personal into the kind of more factual, evidential world, and saying to the people out there who are so skeptical, how do you deal with this? You can't explain it away. It's real.
Well, what I like is when the skeptics do have an experience, and then they have to shift their own reality. And that Michael Shermer thing is
Michael Shermer.
Yeah. It's like, yay,
that was a lovely
dunk.
article he wrote. Oh, it was just a lovely article. And when you think about his experience in the range of what experiences there are that people can have, his was really not very dramatic.
No.
I mean, it was fairly mild, but that was enough to really make him open his eyes. And I start to think, what if he had some of these other experiences? What would that do to him?
I know. Yeah. Well, it's the white crow thing. You can't prove. You've got all the black crows, and then there's this. If you can find the white one, then all of a sudden things are different. And that, for me, that's what this is. A lot of it is also letting people know. And you went to areas that some people aren't familiar with, and that was the full form materializations. That isn't a normal topic in a lot of these surviving death books. Okay,
I mean, physical mediumship is very strange, and it isn't normal. You're right. The whole world of it. And that's why I was very careful in my book to kind of walk people gradually through various areas of this, hoping that by the time we came to these really more extreme scenarios, such as physical mediumship, that they might be ready to be open to it, because I try to open the door one step at a time for people and sort of start with stuff that's easier to access, and then gradually move forward and ask different questions. And there's a sort of a structure to it that I think makes sense. But when you take it out of context, Wendy, and you just sort of throw it out there, materializations, it's just almost impossible to talk about it in that context. It's impossible for people to deal with it, and I don't blame them.
Well, we need like 2 or 3 hours to explain it.
What's that?
We need 2 or 3 hours to explain it.
I know, but that's the value of my book. I mean, I'm not trying to overly promote it here, but I really gave a lot of thought into sort of putting it in the framework that would make it accessible to people.
Yeah.
Leading, for instance, as you recall, I talk about some of the ways that we know that even human beings can affect the physical world, without the help of any spirits, that there's all kinds of psychokinetic things that happen. So if you can accept that, then you go one step further, and maybe you can accept that objects can be moved by a spirit or by some kind of energy with a medium, and maybe therefore you can accept that something can materialize when you see all these scientists that have seen it and documented it. So it's sort of gradual progression. The scientific documentation of it is an important component, because people can feel safe and not feel it's just some crazy thing that crazy people are talking about.
Right.
No, these are skeptics. These are profoundly skeptical, very sophisticated people who went out and studied these mediums and observed these things. And forced to come to the conclusion that they're real. They couldn't explain it.
That something's happening.
So,
Oh, well, and so just to give people
yeah.
a setup for the normal PK stuff, it's like when you are upset, you are highly emotional. It can go both ways. It can go that you're super happy, but usually it's super upset, frustrated. Then you will notice that you have a tendency to experience computer malfunctions or lights, shorting out, or batteries having a problem, or cars breaking down. Those kinds of things are electrical anomalies that are sometimes experienced by people who have had these incredible and intense emotions, and they don't connect the dots until people start saying, well, I've had this experience too. And that's a PK. That's a PK example of what that might happen. And there are some people who can't wear watches because their bodies are just too, the electrical stuff isn't compatible. And those are, subtle PK elements of what our body is doing that we really aren't really tuned into. But so to get from there to a non-corporeal form, make an impact on our reality, well, I've had enough experience with ghosts to say, yeah, they can. But I don't have the documentation.
When you look at it from a very sort of objective, or whatever, a really hard-nosed kind of objective perspective, you have to acknowledge that some of these things that we think are caused by spirits may not be. They may be that human beings have greater powers than we understand to facilitate, physical psychokinesis and the movement of objects and things like that. It's very hard to be able to determine. You can't prove what's the cause of it. That's the point. Well, and I acknowledge that in the book, but there are many reasons that one would lean in the direction of it being some kind of, certainly an external force. But anyway, there are people that argue and have thought a lot about this and will argue that it's possible that human beings themselves can create these effects without the use of any external spirits or dead people or anything like that.
That's what I like about what you've gone through and tried to do, is remain objective. Even though you're experiencing some of this stuff personally, you're still saying, okay, I can't prove that the psychic didn't have some kind of a telepathic connect with me and read my information instead of, getting it from somewhere else.
Yeah, I think it's really important to be willing to look and be willing to acknowledge that, because it's really a valid argument. And even Julie Beischel, who, it's her life to study mediumship, she will say, and she wrote a brilliant chapter in my book about how they do it there at Windbridge and what she thinks about mediumship. And we're talking now about mental mediumship. Mm-hmm. She says plain as day, there are two possibilities, and it's like 50-50. We don't know which it is. And the two possibilities are that the medium is bringing through information from a deceased person, which is what they're absolutely convinced is happening. And the second option is that it's the medium's psychic abilities that are doing it. And one of the ways we can approach this is to try to learn more about what the process is that the medium is going through, because who knows better than they about what's happening? They're the ones we have to talk to about it. How do they know? How do they know the difference, between their facilities of mind? How do they know when they're using their psychic powers versus their powers to access deceased spirits? And so I do look at that in the book, and I've interviewed some mediums and try to discern, what the difference is for them.
It feels different.
Because they're the ones that are doing it. They know more than anybody else, and you have to respect what they say, I think.
Yeah, it feels different. And that's you also approach
right.
that, having them describe how it feels. And there's one that you get, and she has a three different, there's a north, straight ahead, neutral, and left and right, and the images come from different areas so that she can track who she's getting it from. I think the right is the dead, and the left is the PSI. It's in your book, so you can track it. But it's a screen that she sees. Yeah, exactly. Different sides represent different things. Yeah. And so, but each intuitive does something different. So just because that's her way, she said she didn't know anybody else who does it that way. And that's typical.
Right.
Each one has to figure out.
Absolutely. And some of them will just say to you, I can't really tell the difference, and I don't really care. And why should they?
What was it that really got you to think there's something to it?
In terms of the research, there were lots of things. You're talking about the research aspect or my personal experience aspect?
Well, let's see the personal thing, because the research, we can all look at the numbers on that. The personal thing is when you go in as a skeptic saying, well, I'm going to be totally, objective about this, and then all of a sudden the tables are turned.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And I think I was objective, as you said earlier. During the experience, you have to let go into that experience. But if you have a record of the experience, then you can be objective later. So when I did these mental mediumship readings, I think the first thing that really, in terms of the chronology of the things that happened to me, the first step was the readings that we were just talking about with these two extraordinary women mediums who got through two people who were close to me, both of them saying the same things, basically. It's a long story, but they repeated things that they had said the first time, and they were just so accurate. These mediums probably had 90% accuracy, which is very unusual. And I was really careful that they couldn't know who I was, particularly the second medium that read for me, who was in Ireland. I even made up a fake name to contact her with. I got a different separate email address from my normal email address. She had no idea what my name was or where I lived, even on the whole planet.
Yeah, it was a
She's
Skype.
in Ireland. She just works through the computers. When you're sitting there with somebody who doesn't even know your name or where you are, and you just get 1, 2, 3, 4, bing, 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 accurate points coming through about that she is saying is from the person you lost, and they are accurately describing who that person was, it's really quite mind-blowing.
Yeah.
I'd heard about mediumship, but I was skeptical like anybody else. And, I was very fortunate to have these extraordinary readings. For whatever reasons, they just really happened as, extremely high level for me.
Well,
they were about 2 months apart, and it's about, those are sort of the first thing that made me think, oh my God, how does she do this? What does this mean?
Right.
Look what's happening here.
That's the question. So was it a psychic reading or was it a mediumistic hit?
Right. And, it's not like I was holding the information in my head that, but if you want to, in terms of telepathy, I don't think she said anything that I didn't know. But sometimes the mediums will provide information that the sitter thinks is wrong or doesn't know if it's right or not. And then they find out a couple of weeks later when they go talk to their father, say, that some obscure detail was correct. So that does happen. But as I say, there's no way that I can prove where that information was coming from. The mediums are convinced. But the other component was, though, Wendy, that the personality traits of the person came through loud and clear, too. It wasn't just cold information, but their personality, their styles of communicating, their quirky character traits, those things came through as well. That's just as compelling as the information when that happens.
Let me give you from another vantage point. I did a reading on a woman, and the thing was that this is in a group setting, and you never know who you're going to get. And I said, so what does the name Priscilla mean to you? And she's like, nothing. Okay. And I'm thinking, gosh, Priscilla, this is okay. And I back off, and then 2 or 3 sentences later, okay, so Priscilla means nothing. And she says, no, Priscilla doesn't mean anything. And but there is somebody that has recently crossed over, yes. And so the information I got intuitively was ask again. I'm thinking, I'm going to go down in flames doing this. So I said, fine, here we go, Priscilla. And she says, that was her given name, and we never called her that. That was what the family called her. She doesn't like that name. And I'm like, oh, okay. So it doesn't mean anything. She knew that all
along, and she just hadn't told you, or she just had forgotten, or what?
She did not like that name. There was such a conflict that I was basically insulting her by using that name because that's not a name that, according to her partner, that she would have used. And at the same time...
but still, to say it didn't mean anything is completely an inaccurate response.
And that's what you have to be as an intuitive or a reader. You have to let them say no, and you don't have to know whether it's right or wrong. You allow the information to go forward, and then the person, and that's what you're doing when you're finding this stuff out about, reading and stuff. The psychic, the intuitive, whoever it is, isn't trying to impress you. They're trying to get information that you will find valid. And the only way I could make that hit was to allow her to say, no, it doesn't mean anything. And yet at the same time, she knew whether it meant something or not. And then when it came out, I was so lucky. The slam dunk was when she said, fine. And I just knew I was going,
the other thing I think that's crucial during a reading to really test it, and I was very careful about, was not to reveal any information to the medium, to basically answer yes or no. Does Priscilla mean something to you, yes or no?
Right.
But you don't want to say, oh yeah, she was my mother, or she did this and that and the other. You have to be very careful to just not reveal anything. And I was so careful with that in my readings, not to give away anything, so to speak.
A good medium or psychic or intuitive doesn't need your information. They give it to you from where they come from.
They don't even want it, I don't think.
Absolutely.
It might even make it harder for them.
It colors it.
It confuses them,
It colors it.
Exactly.
So you really need to do a cold read and let it stand on its own. And so I was just trying to give you a point from another perspective that when they're reading you, they are trying to have it be an open vessel, and they don't want you to help them in any way. And so by the kind of responses that you got, in my view, they were right on, and they were giving you accurate information that you could either say, okay, this works or it doesn't. And in the book, by spelling some of this out and giving people who haven't gone and might be a little bit intimidated or unsure, there's no guarantee that whoever you go to is going to always be able to get that information. But when they do, it's such a relief. It's like a thank you, and that's the only reason somebody who does it really it's a heart thing. It's a thing, just a reassurance of it's okay. There's more going on here than we can see. And going behind the scenes like you have done, the thing I found fascinating was the one you did on George, that Finding George. That was really complicated, and yet
it's complicated.
So
yeah, I know, but it's great because basically the medium provided information that, if it was accurate, which it seemed to be, nobody on the planet knew. So you can't say it was telepathy because she could, some people will say even that telepathy can be so sophisticated that a medium can read the mind of somebody that they've never met in their lives that has something in their mind, in some other country. And, it's just this extreme ability that we might have. We don't know the limits of telepathy. But anyway, in this particular case that I write about in the book, telepathy couldn't have played a role. And it had to do with where a person was buried who had been lost in World War I. His family thought that this guy had been, was missing in action and had never been buried, so he didn't have a grave. And his grandnephew, who felt very connected to this person who died, in 1917 or 16, went to this meeting to try to find out what had happened to him. His name was George, and she gave him very specific information. And one of them was the name of the grave plot, the name of the person buried next to the grave plot where she said George's body was, and just very, very specific information. And the sitter went to found out that there was a grave there, that there was an unnamed grave in that location, and that the deaths in that particular area of this huge graveyard had been the right time for when he lost his relative. So it was this whole saga this person went on, and it shows the value of mediumship to really be able to heal and give people enough information that they can, use it in such a way that's really personally meaningful to them. This guy was able to find what happened to this person and his relative, who he had wondered about his whole life. And he felt a lot of resolution from going through this process. But the ability of the medium in that case was extraordinary. And it is a little complicated to talk about, but the chapter's not that long. And, I hope people will read it in the book. It's really fascinating.
That's why I wanted to, that's something you found. And it was like, okay, this one is worth getting into because it's complex. And then to get all the hits that came as a result, it's like, whoa, how did that happen? Did you, the personal experiment, chapter 25, Stuart Alexander?
That's about with the physical medium. Yeah, and that's at the very end of the book when I'm hoping that people have gotten to a point where they might be able to accept the strange things that happen in physical seances.
All right. Well,
but it's that was a life-changing experience for me. Absolutely.
Okay. We're going to take a break because that I want you to share. Okay, because they're going to read the book. This is a slam dunk you don't get in the other books. Okay. Leslie Kean, Surviving Death. A journalist investigates evidence for the afterlife. You want to stick around for this? This was what I thought was such a surprise because I read tons of these books. This comes back from, the old days when they were trying to say this didn't happen and yet they kept experiencing it. You call this my astonishing second personal experiment. What was this like?
Right, and I just did that because the first one was the mental mediumship reading, some sort of, I call it a personal experiment just because I'm trying to set up as many controls as I can, and sort of see it as a test. But I'm jumping in 100% when it happens. So the second one involved this experience with a contemporary physical medium named Stuart Alexander, who lives in England. And he's an extraordinary, wonderful, very bright, and very genuine and honest person who's been probably spent about 50 years now developing his mediumship in a very kind of private, with a small group of people, sort of in a very private way, not looking for any exposure or anything like that. In fact, I had to get to know him quite well before he would be willing to even allow me to write anything in my book about him. Before I go on, just so I don't forget, Wendy, I just want to tell your listeners that, because this is so difficult to understand, the physical mediumship, I just posted today on my website, which is survivingdeathkean.com. That's my last name, Kean. On this, I posted a video, a talk that Stuart Alexander gave in the UK. It's a video, and I just want to encourage people to watch it, and they'll understand better what I'm talking about if they watch that video.
Thank you.
Because you get a sense of who he is as a person. Yeah, the video is great, and he talks about how he developed and how all these things. And it was a very long process for him. It took a lot of work and focus to develop these abilities. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I had the good fortune of sitting with his small circle. I actually sat with him 4 times before I wrote the book. I've sat with him other times since then. And I was able to experience a lot of unbelievable phenomena that nobody would ever think are possible, but they are because I experienced them and witnessed them myself. And that's what I discovered. And they involve, the physical manifestations in this very controlled, tight environment that they've been generating for years. I mean, I'm not the first person to experience this. They've been generating it for years and years, and lots of people have been in that seance room and reported on this. So there's a range of different things that happen, but it's life-changing. You realize that we don't really understand what reality really is all about, especially when we deny things that really do happen, and we deny that they exist when they do exist.
When he's working when he's working with people, as you said, you had to get to know him real well. So 4 times of talking with him and kind of, breaking the ice. Does he require that with other people, or how does that work?
No, that was just in terms of me writing about him in the book. Okay. And he actually, we've become to know each other he just respected me and could tell that, he felt that my intention was pure, and he just felt comfortable with the way I was approaching things.
Mm-hmm.
And so he actually ended up himself writing the very last chapter to my book, which I think is just a beautiful way to end the book, because he's somebody who's absolutely convinced of the reality of survival. And I love for him to be the last voice that people read in the book. And then he writes himself about what it's like to do what he does and how he developed and what his thoughts are about life and death. But he had to really trust me before he was willing to commit to do something like that. That's what I'm trying to say. If somebody is very sincere, and, they have guest sitters that come into to the seance room and can sit with the group. So it's not like it's closed to people. Mm-hmm. But I meant in terms of being part of this book, that was the decision that took some time for him to feel comfortable with.
And part of that is because he believes in what he does, and he doesn't need anybody really advertising, because he's already got plenty of interest without doing that. He just comes at it from a whole different angle from the way I view it.
You're right. I mean, his focus is to develop and then to make it, to allow people to come and sit and experience that, and it changes their lives. And that's what his goal is really for people to be able to get the message that we survive death. That's what gives him satisfaction. He's not out for anything more than that, really. And he wants to develop and be able to, for what he calls the spirit people who come through him, to be able to do more and more advanced things. And so in order to do that, they just have to sit together week after week, year after year, and work with what he calls a spirit team to develop these abilities. And so he's just very dedicated to that. He's not really, he's not looking for anything else. That's the point.
Well, and this has to do with, determining where consciousness resides. And a lot of people want to put it in a neat and tidy package and say, well, we can, poke around it. Eventually we're going to find it. And most of these people who are mediums or researchers even are saying it's non-local. You're not going to find it there in the body, except
right.
That's where the emphasis is. So has that changed with you as you've been doing your exploring with this?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, and that's one of the themes I think that runs through the book, Wendy, because it starts with the very simpler phenomena. But the one thing that runs all through all of them, one of the things, is the non-locality of consciousness. I mean, it's just consistent, whether you're dealing with the children with memories of past lives, or you're dealing with near-death experiences or veridical out-of-body experiences, all kinds of things. And certainly the experiences that we have in the seance room, absolutely. All of it points towards non-local consciousness, towards the consciousness that's not, as you say, dependent on the brain, that's not generated by the brain, but obviously the brain is the receiver, the reception of it while we're here in this physical world. There are people that can, explain this much more eloquently than I can, such as Pim Van Lommel. But yeah, when you're in that seance room, I mean, you could never come out of that room and feel that, oh, it's just biology, that the mind is just part of our biology, or that consciousness is part of our biology. Doesn't seem to be the case to me.
When I think of investigating these kinds of things and, your own support team, mom, dad, was somebody else saying, hey, this is a good thing that you're doing and keep doing it?
You mean my support team personally?
Mm-hmm. Personally, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say a lot of friends and colleagues. Yeah, my family's been very supportive. I mean, they're not participating, but they are curious and supportive of what I do, absolutely. And that's another thing that happened while I was writing the book. I also lost my dad last year. He died too. So, and I lost an uncle as well. So I've been dealing with a lot of people dying during this time. And my father was very, very supportive, and I was just so sad that he's not here now. He actually was never able to read the book because he died quite suddenly, or I would have given him an earlier version of it. So that's a loss. But yeah, there's a lot of support for me around, in my personal network, which I value very highly.
Well, I knew there was for the first book because it took you 10 years to get to that one. And that was a whole lot of, just a whole lot of effort and going against the grain with saying, okay, I'm going to write it. This is the topic that people are frightened by, and that doesn't matter.
Right. Well, this one feels more risky in a way, just because I do include my own bizarre personal experiences, which with the UFO book, I let other people describe their experiences and witnesses. They're witnessing of the phenomena. But this time, with this subject, you have a choice. You can actually get involved with it yourself, and that's different. UFOs, you don't have that choice. You're either a witness or you're not. You don't have control over it. So this one is very different, and the experiences I had were way more incredible than I ever thought they would be when I began. But but anyway, so it's different when when you're a journalist to kind of combine objective journalism with this other component and try to put it all together. And so the book is sort of a fusion of the two things, really.
What I thought was fascinating that you did experience 4 very close personal departures while you were working on this book, and I thought, good grief, the timing. And I think that would have been helpful to have this as a basis to go to and say, all right, if I'm going to explore it, right now is the time, and here are my people. So did your father come through at any point?
No, I mean, my father, but I haven't really put that quotes to the test, as you might say. It was really my brother who, I think we had the right kind of connection, and there was enough time. My father died actually last spring, and I'd already basically finished the book then. Yeah. But when my brother died, which was in 2013, I was just beginning the book. And it was, before I went to did my mediumship reading, before any of these things happened, and we had a very good, a kind of connection that was a very spiritual connection. And I just feel like there was something that happened there, and I think the energy my dad has is very different. I wouldn't expect that necessarily to happen. You never know.
Yeah, I was going to say, you never know. We're going to leave it open. Surviving Death, a journalist investigates evidence for an afterlife.
Links are in the description for the show. Leslie's website, lesliekean.com, Kean.com. You'll find some excellent resources on mediums on her website. Thanks for listening.